Darren, I'm actually going to focus my attention on a development out of Boston this morning. The Boston Globe is reporting that investigators in Boston have found a copy of the Quran, a videotape on how to fly commercial jets, and a fuel consumption calculator in a pair of bags that was apparently meant for American Flight 11, which of course crashed in the World Trade Center yesterday. The Boston Globe said that the suitcases belonged to a man with an Arabic name who investigators believe was one of those who hijacked the plane and crashed it into the World Trade Center. Right now, I want to check in with Bill Delaney to provide some perspective for us this morning on this story. First of all, is the Boston Globe the only one going with this story?
Well, actually, it's the Boston Herald, in fact, Paula, that's been leading the way on this story as hundreds of federal, state, and local investigators fan out to try to determine who hijacked these planes. It was the Boston Herald, their entire staff of dozens of people thrown into this yesterday, who broke a lot of this important news this morning in their overnight edition. I have with me one of the reporters on that staff, John Wells. John, what did the Herald learn about the hijackers involved in these two planes that eventually crashed into the World Trade Center?
Well, what we learned rather late last night is that authorities have identified 5 suspects of Arab men as possibly involved with this, that 2 of them may be brothers. Another 2 of them apparently traveled into Boston from Portland, Maine, originating, authorities think, in Canada, and that they also seized an automobile here at Logan Airport out of the central parking garage, a Mitsubishi sedan. And apparently within the sedan were pilot training manuals, or a manual that was in Arabic. This is what we're told by reliable law enforcement sources here in Boston, which, you know, it speaks to there's some roots to this in Boston, which not many people are aware of, but it speaks to the idea that there may be a terrorist cell in Boston.
It was in the late 90s, the FBI said earlier this year, that there was a small, possibly just 2 men linked to Osama bin Laden here in Boston. What can you tell us about that?
Well, yeah, there are 2 men. They're both cab drivers who have been, have alleged ties to bin Laden, who lived here in the 90s. One of them has since been killed in Lebanon. The other one has a death sentence over his head in Jordan, I believe. And they were linked around the time of the millennium. They were gone by then, apparently, from Boston, but they were linked to some plotting around the millennium for terrorist bombs in the U.S.
A security source I spoke to this morning, I must say, because we do have to be cautious about these reports, somewhat scoffed at the idea that someone who was heading to a hijacking, who was going to fly that plane, would bring with him a manual about how to fly an airplane. What do you make of that?
Understandable that he would have that reaction. This is raw information that we're getting from reliable law enforcement sources. We're not in the business of selecting out things that seem unlikely. You know, he may be right. I don't know. We're going with the best information we have right now, and things are changing quickly.
Why Boston?
Well, there's a lot of speculation about that. Geographic location, close to New York, close to Canada. If this is true, that there is some cell that's linked to a cell in Canada, a cell here in Boston, that's logical because travel is easy from across the border. I think that there's been talk also about that Logan has a spotty security record. So there's been speculation that terrorists would think this is a good place to stage something like this, although there's been no information regarding that.
The FAA in the late 90s finding some 136 security violations here, fining the airport $178,000, a spotty record at Logan.
Yeah, and I'm hearing today also that, you know, Logan workers are coming out and on the radio talk shows and talking about how horrific they feel the security is there, and that they've known it for years, and one of them One of them said today that he comes to work at Logan Airport at 5 a.m. He could drive a tank in here. This is how some of those workers feel. So there's clearly a problem that needs to be addressed. Obviously, a little bit late.
John Wells of the Boston Herald, thank you very much. This still unfolding story, as I said, hundreds of investigators fanning out to try to determine how hijackers hijacked the planes that crashed into the World Trade Center yesterday that originated tragically in Boston. Back to you.
Bill, it's interesting now that you have both the Boston Globe and the Boston Herald essentially reporting the same thing. I also found it interesting that the head of the the aviation director of the Massachusetts Port Authority is saying that when Logan reopens, that, quote, there will be very significant security changes, including no more curbside luggage check-in and a ban on anyone except registered passengers passing checkpoints. That sounds to me that the spotty record that you were talking about was, well known and well established.
It's been a problem here for years, I have to tell you. They also have had their security successes here, but there have been notorious cases. For example, 2 summers ago, a teenager managed to get over the fence surrounding Logan Airport. He was dressed as an Hasidic Jew. He got over a fence with razor wire on top of it. He went to a 747, got into it, and made his way all the way to London, a notorious case here 2 summers ago. So yes, Logan has had problems over the years. On the other hand, even the FAA report from about 2 years ago, which blasted Logan, said that for a major airport, the violations here were really no more serious than they found at many other major airports. Logan Airport has problems, so does virtually every major airport in the United States. So we shouldn't brand them completely, but yes, it's conceivable that if there was a cell here that was spending time in Boston, examining the place, laying the groundwork for all this, that one of the incentives for being here in the first place was an airport that any of us who travel through it regularly will tell you has its weak points, has its checkpoints that it seems rather effortless to get through. Frankly, we've often commented on it ourselves as we fly in and out of Logan Airport.
But Bill, I got to tell you, that doesn't give flyers out there a great deal of confidence if you're saying that no one wants to brand Logan as particularly much worse than the other airports. The fact remains that hijackers were also able to hijack planes out of Newark and out of Dulles yesterday. And I know from talking to folks on the street earlier this morning, there's a sense of outrage that this could happen, that 4 hijackings could take place in a couple-hour period. Are you getting, I know that John Wells was saying that he's talked to workers at the airport who say that they aren't surprised this happened, but what kind of buzz are you getting from Boston residents about this?
It's the buzz that you hear all over the country, and it's the simple question, how could this have happened? But added to that question, I will have to tell you, and I have spoken to a lot of people in this town in the last 24 hours, Logan is something that comes up here. People go in and out of this very busy airport. There are some 28 million passengers a year in and out of Logan, and many of them have stories to tell of problems here. A colleague of mine, for example, once was in a ladies' room at Logan Airport, found a knapsack, reported it to security officials. Security officials said, yeah, maybe we should look at that, but why don't you call this number and see what you can do about it. They didn't go and even examine this knapsack that was left. And as anyone who's traveled through European airports or Middle Eastern airports knows, they're extremely careful about bags left unattended. So there's a history, an anecdotal history at least, of those sort of problems here. And again, I want to stress, the Federal Aviation Administration, in its examination of Logan back in the late 90s, blasted the airport, but said in the same report, this major airport is no worse than any other major airport in the United States. A paradoxical and disturbing conclusion about how safe it is to get on an airplane in the United States.
Bill, before I let you go, you cautioned us not to come to any conclusions about these 5 suspects who the Boston Herald is reporting have apparently been identified. The reporter you just interviewed described them as Arab men, possibly brothers who might in some way been involved in the planning stages of this attack. Once again, let's make this very clear to our audience. No one obviously can definitively link these 5 men in any way to Osama bin Laden or definitively link them to whoever launched this attack.
No, these are strands at this point, let's be very clear about it, that are being pulled together. On the other hand, law enforcement officials will tell you here that it has all the earmarks of the sort of thing we're talking about. Law enforcement officials here will say quite definitively that they believe that there was some kind of a cell obviously set up here for a period of time, because how else could this have happened in the first place? Let's not forget, 1, 2, but probably more like 8 or 9 individuals hijacked 2 airplanes here yesterday. 2 airplanes from 2 different airlines. 2 different airlines in 2 separate terminals. It happened within 15 minutes of each other. Both these planes left within 15 minutes of each other. So in the space of 45 minutes or so in boarding this plane in 2 separate terminals, they were able to do this simultaneously. So none of this is definitive yet. This is very early on. But as I say, law enforcement officials say you put 2 and 2 together. It's not completely unreasonable, along with the kind of splendid reporting by the staff at the Boston Herald and other newspaper sources here, and sources of our own security sources who all agree it has all the earmarks of the sort of thing that someone like Osama bin Laden could have been behind. Let me add, however, I did speak to a security source this morning who said she felt that people were getting a little too carried away with Osama bin Laden. She scoffed, as I mentioned in my conversation with John Wells, at the thought that there would be, all too conveniently, she felt, a training manual in Arabic in a car.
Sure.
Why would a pilot bring a training manual in Arabic that allegedly told him how to fly a commercial airline? It sounded fanciful to her, and she did say that she felt people were getting a little bit carried away. But I will add, on the other hand, law enforcement officials say you put 2 and 2 together, and it does seem to add up to 4. As far as a cell having been organized here in Boston, laying the groundwork for what seems to have all the earmarks of the sort of thing someone like Osama bin Laden could have put together.
Well, I appreciate your clarifying that for us, Bill, because what you've just reported is extremely disturbing, and I can imagine, based on what you're reporting and what the Boston Globe and the Boston Herald is reporting, you are going to be, I think, in the crossfire of where most of the major new developments are coming from. We really appreciate your insights. Thank you.